This is a spiritual walk with Pastor Ju Unchong. Sand in my shoes. After completing a long desert journey, reporters asked a man what was the most painful thing. Was it the lonely walk under the scorching sun and through the waterless wilderness? No. Or was it the arduous climb up the steep and rugged mountain pass? Neither. The reporters pressed him for an answer, asking again, or was it the cold night? The traveler replied, none of those things mattered at all. In fact, it was the sand in my shoes that tormented and caused me pain. We often think that suffering is due to something immense and difficult, but in reality, many people suffer from people they don't get along with. Do you know how difficult it is to live with someone you don't get along with? It seems like a small thing, like sand in your shoes, but it causes your whole body to ache. A happy marriage can only be achieved if your heart is compatible. No matter how good the conditions, if your heart doesn't fit, it's a living hell. Sometimes, people who seemingly possess all the qualities of happiness break up. When you ask, why? Everyone says, personality differences. Some might think, they're just saying that because they have enough to eat and live with. What's the big deal? But that's a pain only those who have lived that way know. That's why marriage isn't about conditions. While conditions can be developed over time, harmonizing personalities and hearts is incredibly difficult. The Bible concisely expresses this pain. Better to live in a corner of a house than in a house shared by a contentious woman. What a striking expression. It suggests that it's better to live alone in a corner of a house than to live with a contentious woman and be stressed. A tiny grain of sand in your shoe, it seems insignificant, yet it can cause pain in your body and mind. It's exciting and fun to be with someone who shares your heart. There's a saying, a match made in heaven. People who know that a slap is a 3-foot leap and a thud is like the sound of a pumpkin falling over a wall should work together, and only by living with such people can you enjoy life to the point where your hair turns gray. In John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, there's a story like this. There was a cow and a lion. They loved each other to death. Finally, they married and lived together. They promised to do their best. The cow did its best to feed the lion delicious grass every day. The lion didn't like it, but persevered. The lion did its best to feed the cow delicious meat every day. The cow suffered, but persevered. Patience has its limits. Two people sit together and talk. But if they solve a problem wrong, it can lead to a big problem. The cow and the lion argue. And eventually they part ways. The words we said to each other as we parted were, I did my best. If a cow sees the world only through its own eyes, and a lion sees the world only through its own, their world is a deserted island where they live alone. It's just the cow's world, the lion's world. Being compatible means sharing common values and being considerate of the other person. Strictly speaking, marriage exists in only two forms: an altruistic marriage that considers the other person kindly, and a selfish marriage that disregards the other person. Many people appear to be very considerate of their partner before marriage, only to revert to selfish behavior afterward. But think about it. Do you really think mismatched gears can continue to mesh? They might move forward for a while, but at some point a major accident or the machine will break down. If they keep going, an accident is sure to happen. Frequent farting leads to bathroom breaks, and frequent arguments lead to separation. People with a cold of the mind. The Journal of Korean Psychological Association published a study titled Marital Satisfaction of Married Couples According to Family Life Cycle, which found that Korean couples are happier the younger they are, and men are happier. According to this study, couples in their 40s, 50s, and 60s report higher overall dissatisfaction than couples in their 20s. Furthermore, women report the lowest overall dissatisfaction during the marriage adjustment period, which is the period of newlyweds, and the highest during their children's adolescence and marriage. However, men do not exhibit this same pattern. In other words, the study reported that the negative effects of childcare and family issues are felt only by women. Isn't this negative impact only felt by women and not by men? Unfortunately, men in their 40s have the highest mortality rate in the world. It's not even second, but first, and the mortality rate is 3 times that of women. Notably, the highest suicide rate is among men in their mid-40s. Men in their 40s, busy with their lives, buying a house, and raising their children, work tirelessly. Like a thorny fish that sacrifices its life to protect its young, and then dies alone, fathers have sacrificed everything for their children's lives. They even gave away their retirement savings, and sometimes even separated from their families and became mere money-making machines. Hold on. If I give up here, it's all over. I have to hold on for the sake of my children and my wife. But when they return home, exhausted, their wives stress them out, accusing them of incompetence, and their children, too, ignore them, claiming they're all grown up. Then one day, when they're fired from their jobs, they can't even say anything, so they buy a bottle of soju and climb Bukhansan Mountain. Before they know it, their youth is gone, and death is right outside their door. As they grow older, they realize they're becoming increasingly useless, and life feels empty. It feels like a hole has suddenly been ripped through their chest. And then, deep down, a corner of my heart begins to yearn for someone warm and understanding. One day, while listening to an internet broadcast sermon by a pastor known among young people, I was momentarily shocked when he confessed, "Among the talents, I really like Kim Hye-soo." I couldn't believe it. I tilted my head, wondering, what does he expect his wife to say? Then, I thought to myself, the pastor is middle-aged, and smiled faintly. A few years ago, in the popular book, I Regret Marrying My Wife, the author, a psychologist, said this. At some point, I began to like Kim Hye-soo. Ultimately, the infatuation with Kim Hye-soo's heart among immature middle-aged people like me is a regressive phenomenon, an escape from the anxiety of lack of communication and a dull life. We love our families because we think of a mother's warm embrace. The characteristic of a mother's embrace is that it accepts everything. The more painful, the more vulnerable, and even the most flawed, a mother's embrace is the one that embraces us all the more warmly. But when we think of Kim Hye-soo, we think of a woman's large breasts. Men, remembering their own mothers, who communicated perfectly with love, fall for a woman's large breasts, the symbol of motherhood. Isn't that a bit ironic? What men crave most when they enter the home is rest. They love comfort the most. After a long day at work, what they crave most is to rest in a warm embrace. They come home because they long for that rest. Where do they find it? They find it in their wives. When they come home and their wives aren't there, men feel empty. This is because women possess a large, embracing heart. No matter how great their accomplishments and contributions to society may be outside the home, men long for a woman's embrace when they return home. It's in that embrace that they find rest, replenishing their strength to face the battles of life again tomorrow. It's said that British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, while she was Prime Minister outside the home, personally prepared tea and meals for her husband when she came home. But the tragedy of modern times lies in women's refusal to offer their arms. A woman's most precious purpose is to offer a generous embrace. To be a rich embrace where men can find peace. She offers her arms to her husband and children when they return home. The World Health Organization reports that heart disease is the leading cause of disease and death worldwide, and acute depression is the second leading cause. Stress in men is identified as a significant cause of both heart disease and acute depression. Male depression is often indistinguishable from normal male behavior. Therefore, neither the man himself nor those around him are aware of his depression. Instead of accepting and discussing what they are feeling, men resort to alcohol, gambling, pornography, and work to escape their suffering. In these diverse ways, male depression is masked by the man himself. This insidious disease is fatal. Emotions are numb and the depressed state persists. Thus, even when men experience typical symptoms of depression, they seek out a drinking buddy to relieve their stress, or turn to the internet when they can't sleep. Accumulated fatigue is usually overcome by a trip to the sauna. And when sad thoughts arise, the very feeling itself is disconcerting, and men typically seek relief through sex or work. However, the moment a woman refuses to be a part of the family, the home becomes a place devoid of comfort and rest. Husbands who feel unloved at home deliberately delay their return home and wander the streets at night. People suffering from marriage. Most crises we experience arise within interpersonal relationship. The closer the relationship, the greater the likelihood of stress and conflict. Marital relationships, in particular, are more intimate and intense than any other relationship, and because they carry significant obligations and responsibilities, they are prone to constantly encountering difficult crises. This ultimately makes life constantly exhausting, draining our energy, time, and energy. Constantly wastes our energy. And even in a marriage where we should be healing and embracing each other, we struggle with unimaginable wounds and pain. If I had to choose between my in-laws and my family, I don't have much time left. Soon, I'll be sending my children away and embarking on a long journey alone. I resent my indecisive husband. Why did he divorce just because his parents told him to? I was only trying to protect our family, so why did I hate myself so much? He cruelly separated the child he had conceived from his mother, and he decided to divorce just because his parents told him to. I no longer want to rely on him, but somewhere in my heart I linger, wishing he would protect our family. Let's stop living together. Get a divorce. My parents want us to divorce too. Are you in your right mind? Why? I cried and begged him. But I couldn't break his stubbornness, for he trusted his parents so deeply. You and your parents don't get along. You admit it, don't you? Are you going to live with them for the rest of your life? Do you think you can? They're poor people. It's hard to live with someone who can't get along with them. From the beginning of my marriage, I've often clashed with my in-laws, who meddled in everything I did. Even when we moved into the new house, my mother-in-law would go to the new house before me, clean things, and sweep the rooms. At first, I thought it was just her concern, and I was so grateful. But my mother-in-law was obsessed with the fear of losing my son. She kept an extra set of keys and kept coming and going, constantly checking the rice cooker and pots, nagging me about how the house was being kept, and whether my husband had eaten before leaving. It must have been so neurotic that I almost fell into a state of panic. It was the same when I had a baby. When I'm about to lie down, exhausted from my full stomach, the sound of a key unlocking the door makes me jump out of bed, as if my liver is about to explode. And then the next thing I hear, tisk tsk. In the meantime, my husband lost his bearings. He couldn't understand why I couldn't please my mother, and he eventually hated me. I couldn't understand my husband, who would nag me, saying, "You're old, how long will you live to be able to accommodate her wishes?" I endured difficult times and had 2 children. Now my husband is planning a divorce. I sort through the photos, unpack the house, and unpack the kids' clothes. Day after day, I look dazed and put off the dishes. The kids just play, not knowing whether they realize they can't live with their mom anymore. Unable to ignore the reality, we decided to send the babies to my in-laws. I promised to make time for them to spend more time with them, and we agreed to discuss their issues. But that's no use. Tomorrow I'll have to leave them. I haven't separated from my children for 7 years. How am I supposed to live in a world without them? The injustice is so overwhelming, I'm going crazy. I have to be poisoned, I have to be poisoned. I try to reassure myself dozens of times a day, but I can't hold back the tears streaming down my cheeks. I'd rather have an affair and get a divorce. He's the kind of person who feels more sorry for his parents than his own family. Now, if I just get alimony from my husband, I'll have to leave. Now, leaving behind 2 children, ages 6 and 5, I'll be poisoned. I have to live diligently, even if it means getting my children back. A deep wound in my soul when I first started pioneering, there was a time when the church deacon would diligently buy and arrange flower pots, but soon the flowers would wither, fall ill, and die. I felt so sorry. After so many plants died, we now water them with zhangxiang, according to their individual characteristic, and surprisingly, the plants are maintaining their vibrant green color. What about your husband? Like a dying plant, is he secretly groaning and suffering in the dark because of your cold indifference? A matchmaking company conducted a survey of single men and women in their 20s and 30s to determine the lie they most wanted to hear on April Fool's Day. The most popular lie was, "I love only you." Next came, "Let's get married, and you're the most beautiful person in the world." One of the deepest desires in our hearts is the yearning for love. It's the desire to find someone as precious as ourselves, to share our bodies, thoughts, aspirations, hopes, and anxieties. Therefore, marriage, where a man and a woman form a family through solemn vows, reflects the intense desire to become one body, one mind, and one soul with the most important person in their lives. Because marriage demands such great things from each other, it also carries significant risk. A self that is fully revealed can be fatally wounded. Conflicts with a spouse that persist for years can cause serious, even fatal, wounds. There's a pastor I like best. Simply mentioning his initials and characteristics is enough to make everyone recognize him. One day I was listening to a recording of his sermons from decades ago, and he said this. He said he'd never really thought about dying in his life, but in his marriage, it was an exception. He said that he'd suffered so much from marital conflict that he'd wanted to bang his head against the wall and die in front of his wife. When he did, everyone in the congregation laughed. I laughed too. From a human perspective, the thought that even that seemingly perfect person had such concerns brought a strange sense of human warmth. The pastor then spoke of his love for his wife, saying that as time passed and he looked back, he realized how precious she was. "Honey, thank you," he said. "Families are, in fact, destroyed by small foxes, not big ones. Divorce is never caused by big foxes like infidelity or bankruptcy. Instead, it's the small foxes, the other person's temper, uncontrolled anger, dismissive attitude, irritating behavior, self-centered and selfish demands, that diminish the desire to love. And then, ultimately, they become indifferent to each other, and only hatred remains. Who did this to them, and why? A single earthworm dragging its mangled lower body a painful life, harder than death because of you. How grand and solemn is all life. Even at this very moment, countless people are teetering on the brink of death, suffering from the longing and pain of love. They may be smiling on the outside, but their hearts are rotting with illness. One of the emerging problems, seeking to escape this suffering, is addiction. Love is agonizing. They're depressed. They want to die. They don't know where to go in life, so they run around and struggle until they eventually crash and collapse. Reflecting this modern phenomenon, the Korea Economic Daily published this article. The newspaper also kindly adds, "The reason the salaries of psychiatrists have skyrocketed is because the number of people with mental illnesses like depression has increased every year, leading to a significant increase in demand." Still, I hold on to hope. These days, I've been lecturing on the Book of Ruth during dawn prayer. The more I read the book, the more I'm struck by the remarkable woman Ruth is. Ruth never complained before God. Even when she met her mother-in-law, she didn't complain. She didn't grumble, wondering, "Why was I born with such a miserable fate? Why did I have to marry into such a family? Why did I become a widow at such a young age?" She didn't despair or lament her fate. In fact, even after her husband died, she followed her mother-in-law and provided for her. Yes, just like Ruth, everything depends on how you act, not on your circumstances. When Ruth did not focus on people or circumstances, but only on God, doing her best to cope with the circumstances presented to her, she received God's blessing through the inevitable encounter. How could God not be moved by Ruth like this? Let us also try to move God. Even if we pass through a long tunnel of suffering and frustration, the final destination is ultimately called a happy ending. Like Paul, who praised even in prison, let us give thanks instead of complaining, praise instead of complaining. Let's go. Still, I hold on to hope. You have turned my sorrow into joy.